Welcome back to Pragmagilism, the podcast where we cut through the rigid frameworks and focus on what actually works. I'm Ross, and today we are tackling a bold question, which is better conversations in a complex world. Is it dogmatic or pragmatic? This was an idea brought to me by my guest who's with us today, Dan Parsons. And Dan mentioned that he wanted to talk through this, and he has a ton of insights and experience. But I'm going to let him do a brief introduction of himself and kind of set the table for this idea.
Awesome, thank you, and thanks Ross for having me here. So and hello everyone. So yeah, so I'm Dan Parsons, and uh, yeah. So what do I do? So no, I've I guess for the last decade really focused on the agile transformation that's been taking place in multiple corporations, and I guess as I've grown up in this space, it's become less about agile. It's become more about coaching leaders to be great leaders. Um, and more recently, really what I've been noticing is, can transformations happen without alignment between lines of business or across organizations, for example? And I've also I've also begun partnering with a non-profit in the UK called the Better Conversations Foundation, and they've developed a course all around, helping people at work and in people's personal lives just have better conversations. And when I look at the complexity of the world in which we live in, let alone the organizations in which we work in, I think one of the areas that transformation has stumbled upon is simplifying the system in which we operate in, and which developers and teams and leadership teams operate in. And I begun to look at it and go, if we can't simplify the system, and if the complexity remains, well, what are we left with? And we're left with the conversations we need to have with people, the connections we need to make with people to help us get the work done. And I fear that we're losing touch with how to have conversations. And I just, I'm a big advocate for, how do we create that environment? How do we as individuals learn how to have better conversations, for example, learn how to listen and learn how to be more curious? I have a son who's 12 and he has autism, and I have to say, I learn, or he has made me learn more about myself and how I might react in a certain situation, or how I might look at the world, for example. And I think he's helped me become more curious. He certainly helped challenge me, and learn new ways in which to communicate, for example.
Sure.
We've got AI coming in. Well, what's not going to go away is the fact that we still need to communicate with one another. We still need to learn how to have those good conversations. So yeah, so I'm a big advocate for how can we help people have better conversations. So
Sure. And you've been in agile transformations a long time. And I've been in agile transformations a long time now. And one of the things that I, think about when I think about communication is, there's poor communication. So I'm sure you can give me an example of a situation there. But there's also this lack of curiosity. And what I kind of lean into on that is it's not necessarily a lack of curiosity, but a defense of one's correctness or having the
mm.
right answer over trying to figure out the right answer through communication. Like, do you
Mm.
see how that may have led to challenges in the workplace?
Yeah, and so you're going to hear me reference leadership a lot, and that's not. I don't want that to come across to people as though, oh, I've got it in for leadership, because I don't. And when I talk about leadership, it's not just leaders. I think it's team members at all levels. I've also been that leader. I've been a leader of people, and I've had the opportunity to build teams, to formulate strategy, to work on some fantastic initiatives across many companies. Um, but I've also needed to make really hard decisions, and I've needed to communicate those decisions, and deliver unwelcome news sometimes. Um, but we've also been at the mercy of implementing kind of processes, procedures from way up the top. Um, where I'm going with this is quite often at that, when you're a leader in an organization, you're needing to make decisions quickly. You're needing to make decisions maybe with not much data, maybe with too much data, um, and with a variety of differing or differing opinions coming, or voices of opinions coming towards you at any given moment. I then look at we've then got stuff going on in our personal lives, and you probably know of people in your team who've got stuff going on in their personal lives too. And at the end of the day, we are firing on all full cylinders. Um, Being a leader is really hard. It really is. And so on top of that, I'm going to throw something else out there as well. A lot of leaders, particularly executives, they're on a podium. Everyone's looking at them. Everyone's forming an opinion of them. Everyone's looking at their actions, for example, and forming an opinion. And it is difficult. Um, so when you start looking at the environment in which we work in, um, you know, on top of all of that, you've got to be an active listener. You've got to be curious. You've got to apply empathy in how you work with people and respond to questions, perhaps, and you've got to be a good communicator. Um, so, I don't have it in for leaders. I think it's, I talk about leadership a lot because I think the pressure's on.
Well, when
Um,
you're saying leadership, do you mean people in a position of authority? Or do
yes.
you, yeah. Because
Yeah,
like
yeah.
to me, like I always think of three kind of like vectors of like agency. I don't even know if it's agency, but there's like um this notion that you're in a position of authority, therefore you are a leader. Like I
Mm,
don't subscribe to that. It's like you're in a position of authority, therefore you're responsible for some sort of outcome that the
mm,
company's paying you for. But
yeah.
like leadership to me is exactly what you're talking about, like making connections with people,
Mm,
having empathy, like understanding if you and I worked together and you were my leader and you knew like I was having a hard
mm,
time at home, like you showing me some mercy and empathy and shielding me from some of
mm,
the extra work that's coming in, or curiosity, like, hey, if I'm your manager in a situation, I'm like, Dan, what do you think about
mm.
XYZ, because I know you like talking to people and
Yeah,
communicating, and that's your passion. So
yeah.
help me explore that. So I think like that's the differentiation, because a lot of people get put in positions because they know somebody, or they've,
Mm,
been recommended, or,
mm,
they have a reputation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have inherent, leadership capabilities and qualities within them. And I think that that's another thing that like my wife and I have talked about a bunch. Like when we
mm,
first met, we worked together, and she assumed that if somebody was in a vice president position at a company, then they were good at
yeah.
whatever vice president position they were doing, like automatically without question. I think like that blind faith, like it's good if you're in the military, and
Yeah.
you're a private and you have no experience, but it can be bad for the folks in those authoritative positions, because now they feel like they have more control and more ability to direct, as opposed
Mm,
to have that good
mm.
communication. So I think that's an interesting point. And I know leadership's a tough role too. So if you're a leader out there listening, like we're not throwing shade at you individually, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of folks like, and I think the first leadership position I had, I royally screwed it up,
Yeah.
like the first corporate leadership position I had or whatever. So I think like everybody has to kind of go through growing pains and learn. It's just like that curiosity, like you said, are you open to learning from others, or is that position, are you taking that position as like, I need to be out in front and
Yeah.
making every little decision and, just talking about the bad news in the back end,
Yeah.
right?
No, I mean, 100%. And um, I think it's a balancing act. It really is. And you'll hear me talk a lot, I talk about some of the stories out there or some of the things that I see. There are a lot of leaders, I think, who are stuck in that industrial age way of thinking and operating. We are in this digital space where it is more about people first, and that we can't predict the future. My son has definitely shown me that I cannot predict the future. My wife and I, we have to adapt in the moment in supporting him in what he needs. Um, and so it really is, there's a pendulum. And I think, as leaders, you've got to have that awareness. There are times when we do have to make really tough decisions and we have to communicate that, and we have to communicate that in the best way. And but I think there's also an awareness we need to have amongst ourselves as well as around how am I showing up in this moment in time?
Right.
Uh, I will say I don't get it right all the time. So I'm not the cleverest person in the room. So, but and I think that's another thing. That's another leadership trait as well. Is I'm not the cleverest person in the room. The people who are doing the work, who have got their, who are out in front of the clients, for example, they're the people that are feeling this and seeing some of the challenges out there. How can I
Sure.
support them through that? How can we
Well,
solicit ideas amongst one another in
yeah,
the most
I've like
productive way?
in my mind kind of compared like building the right team to like the simplest form that a former army guy like me can figure out, and it's like a fire team, right? Like
Mm.
you have a person that can do the rifleman job, you have a person that does the fire suppression like the machine gunner, you have like a mortarman, and then you have like a squad leader, right? And so that's like a simple team, but it's a cross-functional team. You have set skills. Like I was really good on automatic, bolt, belt fed
Right.
weapons. So like
Yeah.
my M16 scores were okay, but like my 240 Bravo scores, like I was always an expert in those, right? So like it
Jeez.
would make more sense for me to be in that position. And it doesn't mean that I might not have like insights like, hey Parsons, get down, they're shooting at us. You're like, I know you're better at a rifle with me, but if you're standing up tall, you might get might get caught by a stray, right? So I think like that's something that executives need to do, because you said I'm not the brightest person or the sharpest person on the team or whatever. That may be true, but what may be more true is that you're the best person on the team at something,
Yeah.
and you need to bring that value to the team, and other people on the team might be better at delivering software, but that just don't do that part of it.
Mm.
There's 1,000 jobs to do to get software to market. Like you don't have to be an expert in everything. And I think like that's one thing I see like people in leadership positions, especially like their first couple leadership positions, like really hang themselves with, is believing they have to be the best at everything,
Yeah.
and like hiring people that they feel like they're better than, as opposed to like, where can I fill a gap in my skill set with
Yeah.
skills that somebody else has?
Yeah.
Like I'm super disorganized. So as soon as if I'm building a team and somebody is like, you just saw that before we started recording when I was pulling up all 16
Yeah.
documents that I have my notes in for this, right? Like I want to find somebody who's like type A, is going to create a plan, it's going to have a checklist. I love a checklist, but I'm not creating a checklist.
Yeah.
That's not my skill set. You hand me one and I'll knock stuff off the list, but like
Got it.
creating a checklist isn't my thing. So it's like, that to me is something that's like a great leadership trait, is figuring out those gaps. But I want to get back on having better conversation. I could
Yeah.
talk leadership all day and
I know,
completely
I know.
derail this.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
So one of the things that you mentioned in the email that kind of lead up to this was you know this curiosity, does it lead to challenges? I think we said that it has. We might have to roll back the tape, but like I also see, and I'm sure you've seen this, we worked together at one place that definitely worked on this. What do you think what do you think like organizations tend to focus on more? Like, do you think organizations tend to focus on the processes and procedures and policies and the system of work, or do you think they're focusing on improving how people engage with one another? And like, why do you think they focus on one over the other?
That's a tough one. I would say, unfortunately, I think I see organizations lean more into focusing on process, and procedures that we're meant to follow. I think I also see evidence of kind of not focusing enough on the human side, the people side of what we do. I think we throw people together thinking that they're going to become a team, and I'm not convinced many people want to become a team or know how to become a team. So I think I see more around process, procedures, the checklists, and to improve productivity. I mean, when you start looking, you know, when we start thinking about having better conversations, for example, what does that lead to? Well, it leads to, increased productivity. It leads to enhanced employee engagement, for example. It can help with conflict resolution and customer satisfaction, innovation, and creativity. So I think, yes, we've got to have the process, we've got to have the checklist, and so on and so forth. There are environments where that's needed. However, we cannot forget to build the skill sets for people to know how to listen to one another, to learn how to be curious. And it's not good enough to just talk about these things. I do believe you've got to provide techniques and provide an environment to learn, or to just understand what are those things. I mean, we talk about active listening all the time, but do we actually really know what it is? Do we know what that is when we're experiencing it?
Right.
Um, we say we need to be more curious in the workplace. We've got more and more, the neurodiversity population is getting much broader, and we've got to embrace that. And right, okay, so but what is curiosity? I mean, how might we embrace curiosity? Because curiosity to me might be different to what curiosity means to you, for example. But how do we have that healthy dialogue? And I think more encouragement is needed in organizations to create that environment where and I'm not talking days. I'm not talking hours upon hours either, but there are pockets where let's just stop with, let's stop for a moment and actually just talk about this. So,
Sure.
mm,
Yeah, it's funny you say like neurodiversity is expanding, or I think it's just more understood and recognized,
mm.
um, but I think there's I think what people got written off as put in one bucket of things is, they should have been put in some other bucket of things. And like just the overlap with like, we talked about autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression, like all these different things that kind of overlap and comorbidities. And, it's kind of crazy like how many things can be different with our brains, even though we're the
Oh,
same
100%.
species, right? All right, when you talk about having better conversations and listening more, Dan, what does that look like in practice? And what are like the actual pragmatic behaviors of like what do you see when somebody's actually in the conversation and listening more?
Sure. I'll start with one of the things that we teach as part of the Better Conversations course, is around, it starts with the foundation to having a good conversation. It starts with our state. What are the state that we're in? And the easiest way to really think about this is of a traffic light model. So, and having that awareness is really important. So if you're in a red state, okay, you might not be in a place where you're at your best, that you're at your best when it comes to listening, at responding, for example. Um, you might be feeling stuck. Okay. You might have knots in your stomach, for example. Your heart rate or your breathing might be slightly elevated. Um, and that's having that awareness is really important. If you think about amber, Okay, that's we're kind of in the middle here. We're maybe a little uncertain about the hierarchy that's in the room or on the call. Um, we just might have this heightened sense of awareness around kind of what's going on around us, for example. Um, you might be trying to figure out where you fit in. And then there's that green state, which is, completely at ease and feeling really connected with what's around you, the people that are around you, the environment that you're in, for example. You're thinking logically, rationally, and so on and so forth. None of these states are better than any other. Okay, it's an awareness that one needs to have. I worked with someone. In fact, when I was doing the course, he actually put these up on screen. He actually shared with me. He actually has these on his desk,
Oh
and
wow.
they're obviously red, amber, green for anyone that's not watching this and is just listening to the audio. But um, he
They're
actually
like cards like the ref used to give me at soccer, but
exactly,
not the
yes.
green one. I never got the green one.
That's exactly what they are. And he said, there are times when I am red, for whatever reason, I'll choose not to pick up the phone when I'm that. And
Sure.
and I thought that's actually a real bold decision that he's making. But he knows, or he knew, I'm probably not the best in my best peace of mind right now.
Right.
And so it starts with understanding what our state is and being aware of that. And I think, as I said, neither of them are better than any other. And in fact, I started asking at work, can I ever be green? As a leader in a large corporation, was I ever green when I reflected back on my time? And then we're having this whole conversation, and the conclusion we came to is maybe at work you never are green, and but actually, amber can be a really productive state
Sure.
because you're aware. You are, your senses are kind of heightened, and probably you've got a bit of adrenaline going in a good way.
Right.
And so amber can be a really productive way of being.
It's like
Um,
excitement, not flight or fright, right?
exactly. Yes. Yes. And red is that fight or flight. So I've been red. Okay. And I have been in a meeting. This was not so long ago. This was like a year ago. And I've been red and I reacted pretty, um, I'm not going to say badly, but my reaction raised eyebrows. And my
Sure.
boss actually picked up the phone after this meeting that we're in, and he said, whoa, that's not the Dan that that I'm familiar with. And
Sure.
I'm not afraid to share this with people because, my boss Tony was right, that and the thing is I knew at that time, I probably just need to bite my tongue.
Sure. Is
And just
Tony ever wrong though? Come on.
no, he's
I
a good
have a
guy.
story. I'll share details because this happened in 2006 or no, 2005. So 8 months shy of 25 or 20 years ago. I had just left the army and I was looking for a job for a couple months. I found this job. Um, and I was working. I was learning on the go. Like I had this clearance where I could get into the building where the job happened, but I had no skills and experience in actually doing the job, right? So like I had to pick all that stuff up. But in 2005, like the security clearance I had was not a common thing. It was like pre-security clearance proliferation, right? Like it was a pretty big deal. So um I get this job and I'm starting to learn and figure everything out. And I'm getting pretty good at this like business process management development stuff, right? But it's been only like now I'm at, 8 months out of the army, um, not even a year out of the desert, right? Like, coming back from Iraq, like not I was probably low amber, pink most of the time at this point, right? And I had this wonderful woman who was my project sponsor at the client that I was working at, and she was amazing and sweet. and kind and had been there. She was a high-ranking government person, like had been there, super knowledgeable. And we had a meeting and we discussed, things about the process and what had to happen. And then a couple days later, she sets up another meeting and it's like the same meeting, like she's asking the same questions and we're having the same discussion. And then that's like a Thursday. Then the following Monday, like there's a new meeting and the meeting is the same meeting. And I went from, senior system engineer Ross to platoon sergeant Burnham, like in an instant, right? And it was not good. I was like, knife handing, and I was like, this is the third time we've had this meeting. Like, I don't have time for this kind of crap. Like, can you get a pencil and a piece of paper and write it down this time? It's like I'm sick of having this conversation. And like,
Interesting.
totally
Yeah.
like a drill sergeant, right? And pretty immediately I felt horrible.
Mm.
Felt absolutely horrible. And she was like, obviously upset about the interaction. But yeah, it was like I don't know what happened that weekend. Like I don't remember any of the surrounding details, but I definitely went from a pink to, red in that
Yeah.
situation. And like just it was a tipping point and I totally flipped out. And I'm an animated, energetic
Yeah.
person. Like I yell and get
Yeah.
excited and all that stuff. Like I usually am not mean, and like in that situation, like I was totally mean, and yeah, I felt bad and went and apologized, and I'm so sorry. Like
Thank you.
just
I mean,
yeah,
thanks for. I mean, I think that's great that you've shared that because again, I believe this is a conversation that we could have and should have in a workplace, for example. It's because one of the things, Ross, I'm gonna if you want to play with me for a little bit here,
of course,
I'm gonna invite you to just one of the questions we ask in the course. So better conversations. The course we have is experiential, okay, and uh, people can really kind of learn techniques immediately and begin to apply them. And so one of the questions that we ask is, and bear in mind, we are missing a part here because we go into a bit more depth around the traffic light model and so on and so forth.
sure.
But the question is, when I am red, I am, or when I am red, I am, and then dot dot dot. And so the question I have is, what might you be thinking or feeling that lets you know you're in this red state?
Sure, that's a good question. I think for me, it's anytime I feel overwhelmed.
Mm.
And it's not like it's like overwhelmed with like a ton of mundane crap. Like it's not even like important stuff. It's just like maybe it's like the end of the month and gotta pay all the bills and there's a pile of dishes in the sink and I haven't figured out what I'm making for dinner and the dogs need to go out and
Yeah.
one of the kids has an activity and it's just like it goes from like just kind of hanging out to this like pile of shit that you need to figure out like what you're gonna do when, and it seems like
Mm.
everything has to happen at once, like in that kind of like death by a thousand paper cuts of stuff
Yeah.
to do, like really gets me overwhelmed. And I would say that's a red feeling. But I think like other red feelings are, you know, threat,
Yeah.
is this conversation going to put me in a position where, somebody's saying that I'm not, doing what I need to do
Mm.
or not understanding. Um, and then like a big one for me as an ADHD person is like not I don't there's a term for it, but it's like not getting like any kind of positive reinforcement, right? Like I'm totally cool, like I can take negative, my mom's Sicilian, I can take negative criticism, better than most, but like there has to be something in there, like, and Italian moms are always like, they can tell you 100 things that you did wrong but you're always handsome. And so like even if you're not like me, like I'm not walking the catwalk anywhere, but like to a Sicilian mom I'm Adonis. But like yeah, it was just like if I'm getting like negative feedback and there's like I got negative feedback recently and I don't even think it was directly to or about me, I was just in the call and it was like this brings zero value,
Right.
and like that is a horrible thing to say to somebody
Mm.
about them or about somebody else, but it's like zero value. Like there wasn't one thing that this team of people did in the last, 6, 12 months that
Mm.
helped you in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. Like it was zero. Not I'm not getting the value I expected, or
Mm.
I would appreciate if I got more value. And like that kind of like absolute like thing, like that puts me red immediately. Like you're oh, I'm worthless. You know, that's like the
No,
thing
I
that
mean,
goes in my
yeah.
head.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And, there's a lot that, if you and I were working together, there's a lot that you and I could learn just from that. Um, the next question I'll ask is when you're green, you know, what what am I? When I'm green, I am what?
Yeah, not at work.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's
So I was
interesting.
green. I was green this weekend. I know you're an F1 guy. I'm a huge soccer fan. I actually, all of these things, I'm wearing some kind of sports jersey. This is a throwback AC Milan jersey from like the 90s. And they came back and beat Juventus and got into the Super Copa final. And the Super Copa, it's not a big tournament or whatever, but it's a trophy. And then against our other like Juventus, I hate Juventus. Like you ever talk to me about soccer for 5 minutes, I hate Juventus. And then a little bit more, I hate Inter, right? Our share a stadium. It's like if the Jets and the Giants played in the same division, right? Like and they share the stadium and they share the
Okay.
city and they share the fan base, right? And they've been a very good team. Like Juventus was a great team for 15 years, and then Inter has kind of stepped into that like next like great dynasty in Italian soccer. And we came back and beat them like in stoppage time. It didn't have to go to penalties, and we won this like Super Copa. We had just fired like that was green, right? Like that was amazing. Like this coach has been there for 2 games. Comeback wins. It was gritty. Like it looked like they cared as much as me, the fan cares. For extra money as opposed to getting paid. Like I have to pay for my Paramount Plus subscription and like all that stuff. And like like that was green.
Yeah.
I want to. I scored a goal from behind half field as a kid, right? Like
Jeez.
that's green,
Yeah.
right? Like that's crazy. Like that never happens. Just stuff like that. Hanging out with the kids.
Yeah.
My 16-year-old and I play PlayStation hockey,
Yeah.
like against each other a couple times when the kids are at my house and not at their mom's house. Like just that is green. Like it's fun. He opens up. He talks a little bit more than he usually does. I mean, he's a 16-year-old kid. Like he's not like telling me all his deepest, darkest secrets, but it's fun. That those kind of things are green. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
every once in a while at work you'll get green. Like when I was at Fiserv, I had this like really successful planning event. And like the first day was a complete S show. I was in India, like the folks there just didn't want to push back. And I knew they had to push back and ask questions and stop pretending like they knew everything, like to actually have a successful event. But I wanted them to feel the pain. And I wanted the folks like back in the States to feel the pain of not getting anything back from the style that they were implementing as far as like how they thought they should be interacting with these folks. Then the next, and I wasn't sure that this was going to work. It was totally a gamble, and it could have been, my last day at the company or whatever. But my boss and I, he was the chief transformation officer. We're sitting in this room, and it was four engineers and a business analyst talking about the same single data field on a website for I don't know 2 hours. They were like strategizing and really they were just like trying to figure out the answer to a question that if they had just called
Yeah.
their second level product person, they would have had the answer in a minute. And my boss is just getting talk about red, like it's just creeping up his neck, like up his ears, like I could see like his whole head was turning red. And I'm like, we got to let him screw up, man. Like we have to, right? So next day I taught them story mapping real quick, like rapid estimation. It was supposed to be a PI planning. Like we knew the plan wasn't going to be great, but better than whatever they were going to come up with on their own, right? So kind of got that. And I was like, you need to talk to the folks, back in the United States. Like, you have to communicate. You got to figure out, like, you need your voice. And it was successful. And the plan was close. Like, it wasn't great. It's a plan in digital space, right? But it was good. It was better than any plan they had ever made at that organization. So I was like super stoked about that. But yeah, that was like a green work moment. But that was, you know, once a quarter
Yeah, no.
in planning, right?
And and in identifying those moments or identifying those triggers or that's a big step in regards to just having that awareness. Because I think a lot of the time, we don't spend the time actually reflecting on how might I be feeling in that moment in time. And someone has actually said to me, they did ask, they're on the course, and they did ask, oh, if I'm ready, does that mean we can actually avoid the conversation? It's actually no, that's not what we're saying here.
Right.
But understand kind of what those emotions are, or what your state is, and then explore ways in which, how might you take yourself out of red, for example.
Yeah.
I've taken
Well, I
myself
think
off camera.
yeah, what do you think I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, no, go ahead.
Um what do you think, you talked about leaders having empathy,
Mm,
right? That's important. If I'm a leader or, senior person on the call or whatever, and I'm in the red and there's like something that comes up, like, what's your stance or what does your course talk about? And this isn't anything that we talked about before. It just kind of popped in my head, like vulnerability. Like, I'm having a bad day. My kid went to the emergency room or
mm,
fell off the playground
yep.
yesterday and broke their arm or whatever. Like, give me a second. Like, how do you said you went off camera? Like, what do you talk to people and how to behave so that they're, people are understanding of why they're going off camera or,
Yeah.
putting their hands in their head or whatever.
So, I think this is where we've got to. You see, I'm comfortable with vulnerability, but not everyone is.
Sure.
I've worked at one organization where, I felt comfortable in being vulnerable. And that's, and what I mean by vulnerable is by saying I don't know. Okay.
Sure.
Um, and I worked at another organization where if you said that, it would be frowned upon because the
Right.
expectation was, um, and and that's one example there of vulnerability.
Sure.
It's I can be vulnerable with my team. I can be honest. I can say I don't know, or I can say, what, I'm not in agreement with kind of what's coming down from the top here, but this is it. We've got to go forward with it.
Sure.
Um, and I think it's that there, I think, is applying a bit of empathy to the environment, or to what's around you. Um, don't know if that's answering your question. That's
So does the class talk about that at all as far as like, so I used to work for this place called Leading Agile, and they have a ton of stuff. Like, one of the things that I always like that really actually changed my perspective on engaging from a professional perspective. And I think it was like I got something out of it I wasn't supposed to. So like I didn't kind of fit at Leading Agile anymore. But like, they have this thing called the trust influence loop. It's the process of gaining agency. And agency is the ability to change people's minds, basically, or to have enough trust and influence that people seriously consider what you have to say. Like, if we met off the street and you're like, I'm in Agile, and I'm like, oh, you should do Kanban, you'd be like, no, right? Or maybe, but not because of anything you said, right? So, really, to me, like, building trust is how you build like your most trusting relationships at home. Like, maybe not as open book. Like I'm not going to talk to you about everything I talk to my wife about, right? But like I'll talk about, like, I'll be transparent about my living situation. Like I told, like when we first met, I told you within 5 minutes, like
Mm.
I'm half my time in one place and half my time
Yeah.
in another place. Like I'm not, I don't live stationary. Like I'm a
Yeah.
week on, week off in different locations, and like that kind of thing I'll talk about immediately. You know, uh poor Julie that I yelled at about the pencil. Like I'm not gonna tell, random people that I don't really know that story. Like I might tell them later once I have some of that trust. So it's like, what do you kind of divulge and how? And then like how do you influence others' abilities? So like
Right. Yeah.
is that something that you all touch on?
Yeah, no, okay. No, I appreciate that because there's a number of components to the course, and for those that are watching, you can see this. For those that are listening, there we go. All right. So, sorry, my dog is in the way. I'm gonna move you over
Oh,
there.
the puppy can never be in the way. It's always the
There we
human.
go. So, so what the course covers is it talks about our state. Okay, and we've just spent about 5-10 minutes talking about that, and gaining an awareness around what is our state in this moment in time. It then invites people to think about, what are we making up, okay, in a conversation, and what questions could we ask to kind of flesh out or help kind of prevent ourselves from making too many assumptions. Okay. Interestingly, if I'm red, I'm probably making up a ton of assumptions
And they're
because
not good.
I'm not good. I'm not thinking in the right way. I'm
Right.
really not. And I've been that person. I've been that state of mind before, where all of a sudden I'm just making stuff up. And it's not a healthy place to be. It really
Right.
isn't. So state can really influence kind of how you listen and maybe the assumptions you make. Now, what was interesting is with the scenario that you provided, this is around context. So we might not realize it, but we all bring history. We all bring our personal history into places, our emotions, that we all have expectations and so on and so forth. But through listening, through being curious, through asking some questions, for example, we can begin to understand a bit more about Ross's background, for example, or where Ross goes, as you say, you bounce from two different places. Okay, well, it's down to me as a human being as to how I react to that and what I do with that information. So a lot of this is it's down to how we show up.
Sure.
Um, but what the course takes us through is understanding our state, understanding kind of how we might be making assumptions, but also kind of context. You know, time. What is time zone, for example, is important. Just understanding people's backgrounds is important as well. So we all have to, you know, are we thinking about these things? Are we asking questions to elicit this type of information? Data, for example. If you think about the world that we work in, delivery managers. When I was leading a team of people, we had a ton of data that we had available to us. We had to make decisions based on data, but there's always a story behind the data. There's always a story behind the
Sure.
numbers. And one of the things is I think a lot of leaders I just want to know what the number is. It's like, but we actually need to peel back the layers and just understand some of the context behind that. And all
So
this,
a guy that I know very well, Will Haas Evans, he's like design guy, but also
mm,
a product person, right? He used to always say that humans try to make binary decisions.
mm,
Like they force themselves to say, is it this or that?
mm,
And really, there's 1,000 things in between option one and option
mm,
two, but it's easier for people to make more decisions if they boil everything down to binary.
mm,
And I think like that really resonated with me with what you were just saying, because like leaders just want the data because they want to be able to say, is it good or is it bad? Is
mm,
it working or is it broken? Right? Like they don't want to have to think about that story. But
mm,
I mean, you're spot on. Like and anybody who's worked at a large enterprise knows that the data is sure it's
yeah,
the data, but it's also super gameable. There's a story behind like bad, like sometimes if something looks bad, there's like actually a really good story behind like how it was bad, but it got better, and or we found something that was broken and we had to derail our plan to fix it, but it didn't go out to production. So yeah, spot on.
Mhm. And it could be as simple as, tell me more about that. And and that alone, the response you get needn't be an hour's conversation or 2 hours, or just that eliciting that extra bit of information could be enough. Could be enough. And
Right.
I had that situation with a client yesterday where they were sharing some background around how they adopted um, various processes and Scrum and Kanban and so on and so forth. I was making up some assumptions, and then when they shared the context, the background, it was like, oh, now it all makes sense. Now I can make some different decisions, for example. So
Sure.
um, as to the direction we go. So it is pausing, and it's just inviting people to respond to a certain set of questions. Um,
Sure.
we also talk about, how do we listen with curiosity? And again, you've got to want to do this. This is all about how we show up as individuals. So the course takes us through all of these things, and it provides techniques to apply and so on and so forth. And but we also then look at, how might we apply all of this to providing feedback, for example. Uh, Feedback is, I hate, I'm terrible at giving, I think I'm terrible at giving feedback. Um, as a leader, you're often needing to give feedback without perhaps sometimes even seeing and observing what happened, because you might be hearing feedback from an external source, a client, for example, or
Right.
um, and I think there's nothing worse than giving feedback for something that you haven't actually observed yourself.
Yeah.
But as a leader, you've still got to do that. Um, so how do you prepare for that? Well, first of all, I've got to make sure I'm in the right state. Um, I've also got to not make assumptions. I've got to do my background. I've got to get the information to make
Sure.
sure I fully understand kind of the steps. But also, this person is going to have some context too.
Right.
So I've got to give the space for them to also share kind of their, what was happening for them. Um, and as I'm doing that, I've also got to listen with curiosity.
Sure.
So and then I've got to apply kind of my state, the assumptions. I've got to apply the questions, and I've got to package it all up. But I spend quite a bit of time just making sure, am I framing this in the right way? Am I preparing for that conversation?
So I have like there's this crazy story.
Yeah.
So my first gig as a project manager, I wrote this proposal with like the business development team. And it was a small company. I think it was like the 18th person hired at this company. Maybe the 22nd, but the active 18th, I don't remember. It was something like that. It was small. And I was a creative writing major the first time I went through school. Didn't finish, but like really enjoyed writing. So they were like, "Oh, like you like writing, you understand technology, like you can help write proposals." It's like, "Oh, that'd be cool." So me, like a bunch of other people, wanted to rebrand the OODA loop or Plan, Do, Check, Act, whichever one you're comfortable with,
Oh
into
yeah.
this like thing that like is our like the company I was working for is a brand, right? And I came up with this thing called Acer, and it was before Acer computers, I think, or at
Oh
least
wow.
before I
Yeah.
knew about them, right? And I was like, it was like analyze, collaborate, evaluate, recommend, right? So basically, like there was this large government organization, and they had 20, 30 SharePoint sites out there. And we're going to go through all the SharePoint sites and do some analysis, collaborate with the folks on the team, do an evaluation, make a recommendation of which SharePoint site should move in which order, right? And so a couple months into this project, like I had this plan. I wanted to do the smaller, less intrusive things first. So like to get some adoption, get some spin, like there, and it was about like not only was it a couple of small sites, but the folks were like jazzed, like they wanted the new tool, like they wanted to innovate, things like that. And SharePoint back then, it wasn't super innovative, but there was workflows and
Yep.
audits and all this stuff, right? So, and then there was this one site that was huge and was going to impact like 60% of this government organization. And the CIO I was working for was the CIO of this government organization. And she was like hell bent on doing that. So, I went through and like I took her feedback as well as important feedback. And I think I made that group of sites like second or third. I don't know, maybe third or fourth. It was close to the top, but I still had a couple like smaller ones to get some buzz. And she complained to the CEO who was working with me on the proposal, and basically he said like, I want the person who wrote this model, this Acer model, because that person understands what's going on, and Ross just doesn't get it. And like luckily my CEO had the context that I actually came up with that and like, invented it. And then we talked and, I was like, look, if she wants somebody else, we had just hired this other amazing project manager, like just put her in there, like whatever. But like if they do this big site first, like I believe that it's gonna be harder. Which is why I'm saying that. So if you can get, the other PM to either convince this lady, and I was young, I was like 24. There's a bunch of things that were going on in there, but it was definitely funny. And I think like they ended up doing the order very close to the order that I had presented anyway. But like the person who took over for me was, definitely more experienced
Yep.
project manager, program manager. We called them white beards. I mean, she was a wonderful woman who had no facial hair. But like we called them white beards in the military, like people who had been around for a long time, like knew what they were doing. And
Got
you could
it.
just trust them. So it was kind of funny. But yeah, it was like I was like, if it was like a huge company, like you're talking about, where you had like 50 people reporting to you, and you were taking a very important client, a
Mm.
CIO at a government agency's word for it. Like I probably
Mm.
would have had my butt in a sling,
Mm.
because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
very interesting. Okay, so that framework, or kind of thought pattern that you just showed for the better conversations is really neat.
Mm.
Do you think that sometimes like companies overdo the communication process and like really start getting rigid and have like checklists and punch lists of things that you have to talk about? And what do you think those approaches do as far as like creating that empathetic kind of relationship where you get that curiosity and listening?
I mean, I don't. I need to think about this because do you have any examples?
Sure. So I think like the annual review process,
Oh,
like
okay.
90% of companies might be a good example,
Yes.
where there's like a required approach to
Yeah.
communication, and like maybe the employee does it first and then sends it through, and
Got
then
it.
HR validates it, and then the
Yep.
manager looks at it. Like I'm sure, I'm 100% sure you're familiar with the process and all that.
Yep. Oh, yes. The annual review. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, no, yeah. Okay. No, I get it. But you see, and this might come across as though I'm just oversimplifying it, and because I keep resorting back to how am I going to show up in that conversation. So if I'm a leader and you're a member of staff, for example, how are we how are we going to show up in that in that conversation? Because you might think you've had a wonderful year, and I'm going to come in and might burst your bubble because maybe it hasn't been as good of a year as you
Sure.
wanted it to. And I think we always say, you should never wait to your year-end review or your mid-year review to get that type of feedback.
Right.
And that would be kind of like the worst case scenario, I guess. But when I do mid-year reviews, or when I was doing mid-year reviews and year-end reviews, the worst thing I could have done is not prepare.
Sure.
Same as giving feedback. I have got to give myself a break to prepare for that conversation. And if that means I have to put a 15-minute block or a 5-minute block before that call so that I take a break and I take a breather, that's I owe that to the employee that I'm going to be talking to. I owe it to myself as well.
Right.
So a lot of this is around how I show up, how I prepare. And I would strongly recommend everyone thinks about it. And you know what? You're going to get people who can just fly from meeting to meeting to meeting and just, great. I'm not that
Sure.
person. I have to, whether it be a fantastic blazing year-end review or a not so good one, it doesn't matter. I need to take that break because I've got to put my attention on that person.
Right.
And so I'm going to go back to get myself in check. Because if I'm red, we probably shouldn't do the year-end review. Okay. And I could be red because I've just had some shitty meeting.
Right.
Or I've just been, or there's something crap going on at home. Okay. And
Right.
and so you do need to, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your people to really keep yourself in check. And so, yeah, am I entering this in that amber state, in that green state, perhaps?
Right.
Have I prepared for the conversation? Have I, you know, thought about how this conversation might go? Have I thought about the feedback that I need to provide? The development areas that I see as opportunities for this person, for example.
Right.
So, I mean, we are talking here about I guess, yeah, we are talking about a rigid kind of a process,
Right.
that many leaders have to follow. Um, it doesn't mean to say that conversation has to be stale or I still need to listen with curiosity. I still need to put my attention to that person. I still need to, there'll always be context that I should ask questions about because there'll always be their side to this as well.
Right.
Um, but as a leader though, that doesn't mean to say you still have to sometimes be the deliverer of not I'm not bad news or it might not go the way that they want it to. But
Sure.
I believe very much in preparing for that conversation.
Yeah.
Um, Particularly those types of conversations. Yeah,
Sure. In
yeah.
your experience, what happens when leaders aren't modeling good listening and
Mm.
curiosity, and what's the impact on like that leader's organizational culture?
No, I mean, I have seen that, and people don't want to hang around. It's. I have worked in that command and control type of environment, and that as a leader you can survive in that environment for so long, I think. But I think people get tired, people get run down. This all might sound very cliche to whoever's listening to this, but it is true, and I think there can be a creation of fear within an organization as well, where what's the point in saying something if nobody listens, or the head of the product organization just doesn't want to listen to my ideas,
Sure.
always believes they're right. People just shut down.
Yeah.
Um,
Fear
they
and
do.
apathy is not are not the two best ingredients
Mm,
in a organizational culture for sure. I
mm,
think like the apathy one kills me because um it's like draining energy out of people who
mm,
are excited. Like when new people join a team and they're like so excited and want to make change, like, and I had this recently. Somebody joined the team that I was coaching, and like was so excited, and I wanted to make sure he didn't get apathetic. So I was like, "Hey, dude, like all of your ideas are awesome, but like we don't have an e-brake on this vehicle, like, and it's in, we
Yeah.
got to make wide turns, and I always say there's no e-brake turning an aircraft carrier, right? Like the bigger your organization is, the longer it takes to make a
Yeah.
change. And I was like, I don't want you to lose this excitement through failure. I want you to keep your excitement, but understand, like, change in this large organization is not an instant gratification situation. Like, when I took my CSM class, I was the only coach, or maybe there was another coach that was going through the CSM class. And the instructor was like, "Hey, we have an agile coach on here. Like, why don't you talk to people about what being an agile coach is like?" And I was like, "Hey, like if you are interested in having a quick win and getting a pat on the back really good, and people liking you like instantly, like this isn't the job for you. Like stay as a scrum master, stay as a product owner, like do those roles where every 2 weeks you're going to get like a good result."
Yeah.
As an agile coach, like every 2 weeks is, especially for the first month, 3 months, is kick in the face.
Yeah.
Like it's not great. Like people don't
Yeah.
like you. Like you're like they assume, they bring assumptions into your conversations that you don't think they're good at what they're doing, or they aren't adding value, and you have to change them. And it's like, no, that's not what this is about. But like they're not going to hear it until you build that trust and influence with the team, and that takes time. Like it's not instant. So definitely.
So
So what's the role in psychological safety in building these better conversations? And what can any leaders that are listening who want to have better conversations with their teams do to build that safety and get people to speak and listen openly?
yeah, this I think it starts with how you show up. Um, and I think how you show up, I'm hoping if you're modeling those right behaviors, people that will then begin to model those behaviors as well. So, if you're showing up and you're even keel, you're asking clarifying questions, for example. You are listening, okay, and you're listening intently. Um, then I think others, whether it be your peer group, um, or whether it be members of your team, I have seen evidence, I've seen and I've observed other people begin to model those same behaviors. So going back to psychological safety, it's how we create that is what counts. So we've got to create the right environment.
Right.
It's what is interesting is, I kind of gave up a long time ago it got quite overwhelming actually trying to think about the culture of a large bank, for example. I don't think you can influence the culture across an entire organization, but what you can do as a leader is, I do believe you can influence and create the culture that you'd like in your area, whether it be as a line of business or whether it be as a function within the line of business. You as a leader really have the agency, I think, in creating that for your organization and for your people.
Sure.
Um, and so it's down to me as to how I build psychological safety. I can choose to just shut down every conversation that anyone wants to have, or I can choose not to listen, or I can choose not to invite questions, and I can choose not to be curious. Well,
Right.
as a result of that, I will have a conversation I will have an organization that probably just wants to do whatever I tell them to. And it's probably an organization where team members don't really think of new ideas because they know they're going to get shut down by me. Um, so yeah,
Not
it's
you personally.
yeah. So yeah, it's yeah, we have a choice as to kind of the organizations that we create. In
Sure.
this, the shift we're seeing in the industry now around, you know, product managers, and I know there's this, it's been going on for a while now, actually, this big emphasis on product, becoming a product-led organization. I'm not sure, again, this is just my view of the world and the organizations that I've worked in, but I don't know if product managers really appreciate that they have this opportunity in building this culture and this environment, this really rich environment in amongst probably a few hundred people within their product organization.
Sure.
They can influence that. Um, I don't know if some of them, I don't know if all of them are really aware that how they show up will have a ripple effect all the way down from the very top to the bottom. Um, and yeah, leadership is a really powerful thing. And it can make or break, I think, the success of an organization. So definitely it can.
Yeah. Well, I think like you mentioned having, I call them like micro cultures or like these like, separate identities inside of a larger
Mm.
group of separate identities that build like that corporate culture. And like, I think that, if you look at the military, and I wasn't around during the Space Force days, so I don't know how they fit in, but like, speaking from my experience, like the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army all had a different identity. But when we came together to do like a joint operation or whatever it was, like all that identity had the same overarching values,
Mm.
right? But they may be slightly different, like honor, courage, commitment,
Yep.
whatever the specific values are. But the value was, or the oath of service for all of those branches is protect the Constitution, right? Like
Got it.
protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies. Like, so if you have that one guiding principle or set of values that can all be linked back to this guiding principle, like even if you have those microcultures across organizations, like your culture is close enough. It's like the Iroquois nations, right, in upstate New York, like 7 different tribes of Native Americans, but they all had a single focus, or
Yeah.
50 states in the Union all aligned to the same thing, even if our political ideals aren't exactly aligned all the time, right? Like um and there can a chasm can occur in breaking that culture. And I think like one thing that we see in large organizations that can happen in one place but shatter the culture across a larger organization is these like mass layoffs,
Yeah.
like making a decision to get rid of a certain skill set,
Yeah.
or reducing expense in a certain area. Like those types of decisions can have cultural impacts across the entire organization. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, mostly bad, I think, though. What do you think, other than that, or you can expound on that, what are other barriers um, that kind of create bad conversations and a bad culture of listening, and like how does that impact um the organization, and kind of like how do they come up? Like, do you think they're cultural, structural, financial? Like, how do they kind of come into the
Yeah.
fold?
One of there's a book I've really enjoyed reading recently, and I wish I read it ages ago. And I'll put it up here on the screen, but it's David Marquet's book, Leadership is Language. And what I like about it, um, David introduces a new kind of playbook or run book for leaders, and it starts with, he introduces a concept around red work versus blue work. And red work is heads down, let's get shit done. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. And David says that. Nothing wrong with that. That's how we get stuff done. But it's when we don't pause, and introduce blue work, which is, we stop and we take stock of kind of where we might be, or we provide that space to just kind of breathe and think for a moment. That's when we get into trouble. And I've become a strong believer in that and as leaders, how do we create that blue work, which doesn't mean to say out, I'm not saying go hug a tree, that it is just, when do we create those moments to pause and actually just elicit from one another, take stock of where are we, what, how are we doing? What are the challenges people are seeing? What options do we have, and so on and so forth. And how do we create that space and that time for people to just reflect?
Yeah.
And I do think, we get ourselves into trouble when we don't build in the moments to pause. And yeah, that's a barrier, I think, is when we get stuck. And all too often, I've been that leader that's been full steam ahead,
Right.
and not only am I creating stress for myself, but I'm creating stress for the people around me as well.
So I think what some leaders don't understand is like there is a time to do that. There is a
Yes.
time to say, look, like for the next X amount of time, like, and it's short, like not
Yep.
for the next 3 years, we're gonna go full steam ahead, but for the next like two sprints, right,
Yep.
or whatever it is, we're going to drive forward and we're going to put in some extra time and whatever it is, like we're going to incentivize that. Like you're not asking people to do extra time for free or whatever, but like we really need to do XYZ by this time, right? So let's do it. And I think a lot of leaders, they create this persona that they have to be. They either have to be the person that comes in and gets stuff done, or
Mm.
they have to be the person that figures out how to, get expenses down, or whatever. And it's really like you have to be the leader that knows when to do what thing
Mm.
and when to like push back on it when it's not the right time. And I think like Marquette does a great job of illustrating amazing leadership and turn the ship around.
Yep.
But I think like what a lot of leaders who read that gloss over is how specialized and specific like each person in the military's job is.
Got it.
Right. And I think like this is one of the problems I have with leaders like picking up a book without context, right? Because
Mm.
they're making assumptions that
Yep.
like, oh, these people are underneath, Commander Marquette or Colonel Marquette, Captain Marquette, whatever he was when he took over that sub, right? Um, uh, they're underneath them, so they don't know what they're doing. It's like, no, some of these folks are, in the service 15, 20
Mm.
years and have been doing the job that they're doing and have gone through multiple levels of classwork on a very specific task.
Mm.
And, I couldn't come in, I was an intelligence collector. I wouldn't be able to go and do a tank driver's job just because I was
Yep.
a sergeant who had 4 years in service. Like if I got in that tank, I wouldn't know what the hell I was
Yep.
doing. Like any way. So like, and that's one of the things they gloss over with the I intend to. The chef wasn't coming out of the galley, going up to the bridge and saying, I intend to drop the ship 40 meters.
Mm.
Marquette would have been like, you should intend to get your ass back to the galley, right? But like the person who drives the boat for 15 years, if he's saying I intend to drop the ship
Yep.
40 meters, well then fine. Like,
Yep.
yeah, I'm gonna take that dude's word for it.
Yep.
And it's not that the chef didn't have the right idea. Obviously, the chef had the right idea. 40 meters is 40 meters or whatever. But the idea that a good leader just takes anybody's suggestion and blindly goes, cool,
Got it.
like
Yep.
that's a problem. And I think like a lot of times people gloss over that because they'll hear like something on YouTube or watch something on YouTube and of him talking and they don't understand the years or months or whatever of training these folks
Mm.
have. And especially when you're talking about a nuclear sub, like those folks on that ship are, and it pains to say it as an army guy, but those folks are good. Like
Yep.
those Navy folks on those ships, those submariners are good, right? So like I think that that's a thing like that where we make assumptions because somebody's in a position of authority and did something that it fits like any context. And like you're bored, like I don't know, you should get like that tattooed on your bicep or something. Like that's awesome.
That's funny.
All right,
Uh,
so
the the
oh, go
the
ahead.
no, yeah, no, just the other thing that I think is a barrier is, the theme of our talk today, includes the word complexity. I do think a barrier can be complexity. There was a leader that I had the privilege of coaching, um, and what I noticed is his behaviors were being informed by the complexity of the system, which is, complexity doesn't lend itself to speed.
Right.
And this leader needed to get things done. They needed to push things through this highly complex system. And I felt for him because, you know, best will in the world, he knew he wasn't going to get kind of the things that he needed to get done. And so I do think complexity really doesn't help as well. It is a barrier, which goes back to, it's the connections that you create, the relationships that you have, the conversations you have with people that will really help influence kind of like the direction that you need to go. Um,
Yeah. I was in a green space probably because I got a really good laugh out of it. But when I first started at a wealth and investment firm a few years back, there was like a whole team of people working on removing dependencies.
Mhm.
And we're talking about like a huge organization that had multiple mergers and acquisitions
Oh,
that
wow.
was reliant on places outside of their span and control to deliver data or to deliver services or
Yeah.
whatever. And like there's zero chance without a complete top to bottom rebuild of all these things that you do that you're removing dependencies. So I was like, good luck,
Yeah.
like, but that's not happening. Like you're not going to do it. Now, can you create transparency on dependencies and can you talk about how it influences timeline and sequencing? Sure. Sure,
Yeah.
we could talk about that till you're blue in the face. But
Yeah.
every time you tell me that you're starting to you're going to remove dependencies from this, 100-year-old organization that has, 50 M&As at least, like I'm just like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're not. It would be a feat that Superman himself would have to do, right? Like if Superman could code at the speed of light, like that's how that would have to work. So I think like, and I would bring humor to it, because and I always do self-deprecating humor. I think that's like an easy way to break a room. And I was like, hey, look, like I was such a bad developer that I had to take a EA certification, right? Like and learn how to be an enterprise architect. And I was like 5 minutes into any diagram in this organization, I could tell you that you're not removing the dependency. Like there was like one software that had everything that this place did touched this one software. It's like a huge platform, and it's like there in and of itself is a dependency. Like the fact that everything uses this thing, and like we're not getting rid of this thing. Like that's just the thing we have to deal with. So I think like, just stuff like that. But all right. So I have loved this
Yeah.
conversation, but we're gonna wrap it up. It's not you, it's me. No, I think that you've talked a bunch, and I want to make sure that we spend time so you can kind of tell everybody about this class and how they can get in touch with you to get this class. Um, but to build on that, um, other than taking your class, if people wanted to learn how to, improve their communication and listening skills, other than taking your class, which we 100% know is the pragmatic way to do it, what's another pragmatic step that somebody can do tomorrow to kind of start themselves on the journey of thinking about how they can improve their communication or listening?
Oh boy. I think something I've learned is to just, slow down and be present. Um, put your attention towards the person or the people that you're interacting with, and just slow down, and focus in the moment on that situation, and just hear people out, and just be open-minded. So, and that takes, don't get me wrong, it doesn't happen overnight, and I don't get it right all the time.
Sure.
So yeah, it's yeah, and I think the course kind of helps with that. The Better Conversations course, it's 5 modules. Each module is an hour long. We do it over 5 weeks, and you walk away at the end of each module with something tangible that you can actually practice and apply there and then. And there's virtually no slides to this course, because it's all experiential. So so yeah, I've enjoyed kind of learning how to facilitate it, and I've enjoyed kind of also kind of learning to get better at having those conversations myself. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the first step to open-mindedness is understanding that you're probably wrong about something, right? Like I
yeah,
think
yeah,
like a lot of people don't like to be like, oh, like I screwed something up, or I was wrong about
yep,
something, or I don't know everything, especially with like the social media age of
yep.
everybody kind of that vanity of being an expert, and everybody can come see me, even though I'm talking about this and doing a podcast at the same time. But yeah, definitely. So,
Yeah.
all right, get in touch with Dan. All of his contact information, course information, everything will be in the show notes. Dan, thank you so much for
Awesome.
joining. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening to Pragmagilism. Remember, tools not rules, outcomes not traditions. Be pragmatic, not dogmatic. See you next time.